Here's a how to play Roost. So just open up the box. You'll see that your cards are on the left, and you'll have some wooden pieces on the right. Now you want to separate the cards based on the type of the card before you start a match. So you'll note that some cards at the top do not have a green dot, and this means they're part of the original deck, whilst other cards do, and this means they're part of the expansion. First playthrough, you'll want to separate the expansion cards out from the regular deck. So now that all the cards are separated out, you should be left with one deck. At the very bottom, there'll be some helper cards. So you can just put these to the side and hand these to players. When it comes to scorecards, give every player that's playing one scorecard each, and they just look like these cards. Next, find the associated color that matches the scorecard. There's 6 different colors based on the 6 different players. When you start a match, every player starts at 0, which is just 0, 0. If you look at the top, that's associated with the 10s, and that's the 1s. So a score of 15 would simply be 1, 5. Next thing you want to do is shuffle the deck and give each player 4 cards. The player now has 4 face-down cards. No player can look at their cards just yet. It is of note, if you play with 2 or 3 players, there is some cards that you need to get out of this deck beforehand. And with 2 players, there are some further rule variations. So now you want to put this full deck and just place it in the middle. This is now the unknown pile. No one knows what cards are underneath this. You want to flip one card and place it next to the unknown pile. That is the discard pile. Now you want to place down the direction token, just facing clockwise. So this is the direction that the player will travel in. Now the purpose of Roost is to get the lowest possible score by the end of the round. So you want to make sure that you pick up low cards from the discard pile, like this -1 vulture, and also get rid of high valued cards from your hand. Now each player should look at 2 cards. So here I have the Melanchite Kingfisher and the Peking Duck. One is worth 7 points and one is worth 2 points. These 2 players would also look at their 2 cards, and these 2 players would look at their 2 cards. After everyone's done looking at their 2 cards, the first round begins. Now the player that goes first is the dealer on the first round. So that will be this player in this instance. But for every other round, it's the player that lost the last round. Now, whenever you pick up a card from a discard pile, you must replace one of your cards with it. So in this instance, I have a 7 and a 2. So I'm going to replace it with this card because they're relatively okay values. So I just switched out the -1 vulture with the Eastern Wild Turkey. Now, the Eastern Wild Turkey, as you can read down here, has an ability. So since I am the one that played it, I can now play the ability. But before we do this, if any other player has an Eastern Wild Turkey, they can also place it on top of this card. So player 2 realizes they have an Eastern Wild Turkey, so they'll place it on top. You can place matching cards on any face-up card at any point. It doesn't matter if it's your turn or not. Now, only the player that placed the original card gets to do the ability, which is player 1 in this instance. The Eastern Wild Turkey, if you look at the ability, lets you look at any one of any player's cards, switch a card with another player, or flip any player's cards. So if we were to do these abilities, to look at any other player's card, that includes ourselves in this instance. So we could look at our last remaining card, which we do not know about. We could either switch out a card, or we could tap on a player's card and they will flip it. Now, it's worth noting, any card that is face up, including the card in the discard pile, you can always match on top of. Now, if you were to flip a card, you'd pick another player's card and they would flip it up. Any card that is face up, you can match on top of. This includes the discard pile or other players' cards. So in this instance, player 1 picks flip any player's card, and they pick player 3. So they flip this card. It's a Peking Duck. If you remember from before, we do have a Peking Duck, so we would simply pick it up and place it on top. That's the end of player 1's round. Now it's player 2's turn. Instead of picking up from the discard pile, they decide to pick up from the unknown pile. So they pick up the card. It's a 12, a silver gull. But now this player has a few different options with what they can do with it. Unlike the discard pile, where you must switch it with your card, the unknown pile has a few different rules. So now with the silver gull, this player can put it instantly onto the discard pile. They can switch one of their cards, for example. Or if another player had a silver gull, they could directly put it on top of that card. Player 2 in this instance decides they do not want a silver gull, so they put it onto the discard pile. Realizes they have a silver gull, so they match it on top of the discard pile. Peacock, Goose, and Turkey allow you to flip cards. Any player can match onto a flip card. So in this case, I have a silver gull, which has another silver gull. This stack is now worth 24 points, not the original 12 points. However, treat a face-up stack as a single entity. When you flip a stack, all cards within the stack get flipped. When you switch a stack, all cards get moved. When you match a stack, all cards get matched. Face-up cards can't be replaced. So when you pick up a card from the discard or the unknown pile, you can't replace that card. You'll have to pick one of your face-down cards. Now, if all your cards are face-up, you must pick up a card from the unknown pile, and if it doesn't match any of them, you must directly put it onto the discard pile or another player's flipped-up card. The only way to get rid of these cards is through an ability, or switching it, or flipping it back around the other way. So in this case, I pick up Peacock, and I can choose to flip my card as well, back around the other way. When you flip it, it's still treated as a single entity. So now, when everyone's had their turn and it gets back to my turn, I go to draw a card, I can replace the whole stack. Now, when you replace a whole stack of ability cards, in this case, let's just say I had 2 turkeys, I still only get 1 ability. I don't get to do the turkey card twice. That marks the end of player 2's round. Now, player 3 gets their turn, so they pick up a card from either the unknown pile or the discard pile. They don't want to pick up from the discard pile because a silver gull is a high value card and they'll need to switch it with one of their 2 face down cards. You cannot switch an unknown or discard pile card with it. The only way to get rid of flipped up cards is either to match it on the discard pile, match it on another player's card, or get rid of it using abilities such as flipping it back over or switching it with another player. When it comes to switching flipped up cards, you move the whole stack at once. So player 3 picks up from the unknown pile and they see that it's a Peking duck. So naturally, they play it directly onto the discard pile and then they just match their flipped up cards with it. So now we get back to player 1's turn. They can either pick up the Peking duck from the discard pile or from the unknown pile. As the Peking duck is a relatively low value card, they pick it up and they trade it with one of their cards. In this case, it's the Snow Goose. The Snow Goose lets you flip another player's card, so they choose to flip player 2's card. In this case, it's a 1. This is the end of their round. No one can match with the 1 or the Snow Goose. Player 2 goes, they pick up a Cory Bastard. When played, you may choose to look at one of your cards, so they play that directly and decide to look at their cards. They see that their score is now 4. Player 3 picks up a card. They get the Melanchite Kingfisher. They choose to switch it with one of their existing cards, the Bold Eagle, which allows them to look at another player's card. They choose to look at player 1's card, which is a Melanchite Kingfisher. Player can call Roost at any point. They can call when player 3, player 2, or their own turn is ongoing. However, if any player is playing an ability card, you must wait until that ability is over. When a player roosts, their roost is finalized when they flip the cards. If player 2 was to roost on player 3's turn, player 1 gets 1 more turn and player 3 gets 1 more turn, because each player gets 1 more turn after the player has roosted. If they are already on a turn, they still get 1 more turn. Now the round continues on until a player feels like they are in a position to say roost. When a player says roost, they flip all their cards up. In this instance, player 2 says roost. So they flip all their cards up and we see that their final score is 4. Now, player 3 and player 1 get 1 more turn. Every player, apart from the roosting player, gets 1 more turn to try and now beat this score. So player 3 will go, they pick up a card, they see it's a Melanchite Kingfisher, so they place the Melanchite Kingfisher and match with it. And player 1 also realizes they have a Melanchite Kingfisher. So now player 1 has their last turn and they get a Snow Goose. So they play this card. Now, a player that roosted is completely immune to abilities, so no player can target this player with any form of an ability. So that means player 1 in this instance must target player 3, so they choose to flip their card. So now that marks the end of the round. No player has any turns, so everyone flips up their cards, and we see that the score of player 1 was 1, player 2 got a score of 4, and player 3 got a score of 0. Now, because player 2 was the player that roosted, they check if they won the round. As they got a score of 4, they did not, so now their score gets doubled. It becomes 8. If they had won the round, their score would have been minus by 1. So their final score would have been 3 instead of 4 in this instance. Now, the player that won the round, which is player 3 in this instance, does not receive the -1 because they did not roost. So their final score remains as 0. It is worth noting that some cards have effects when the round ends or near the round end. For example, the Flamingo card. If you do not win the Roost with this card, play direction changes. If you Roost with the Cool Chook, you get the last place player's score added onto your score. With the Vulture, if a player Roosts, you can choose to give them this card, and now they must start the next round with one extra card. The White Stork score is dependent on how many Storks you have. If you have 4 Storks, its score goes all the way down to -15. If you play with the expansion cards, it's worth noting that a lot of these have conditions on your endgame score. If a player makes a mistake and matches the wrong card onto the discard pile, they must pick up 2 more cards and not look at them. This player cannot play any more cards onto the discard pile until the next player has had their turn as well. If a player places the wrong card onto a flipped up card, they must take back their card face up and collect 2 more cards from the unknown pile. They can continue to keep matching with face up cards. At the end of the round, add your score. So in this case, the green player is on 15 and they got a score of 5. So they will simply put their score up to 20. So 2-0. The game continues with decks being shuffled between each round until a player reaches a score. Now, these scores do change with the amount of players. If there's only 2 players, it's 50. 3 players, it's 60. And 4 players, it's 80 points. When a player gets to these points, so let's say 80 points, the game ends. The player with the lowest score wins. If there is a tie where 2 players have the same low score, another round is performed. Now, if the player that originally was on 80 points now can manage to get their score, say, down to 79, the game continues on because no players hit 80.